welcome to this new edition of the Foresight training course. We are on schedule and ready to start. We will have 4 sessions in total during these 2 days event. And let me open formally the event. We have reached 100 persons online now, and so I think it's time to go. And first of all, let me thank everyone for joining the event this year. I saw in the list of participants that there are several old friends of the Fondazione Benzi, and thus you may already know, but also for those who are for the first time joining us, Fondazione Gianni Benzi is a not-for-profit scientific research organization working in the area of rare diseases and pediatrics. Our main focus is in providing ethics and regulatory support to research teams and research management to facilitate the smooth conduction of research. We have been working since so many years now in Europe and beyond, several research projects and hundreds of research teams. And we have, in parallel with this, we have also always, since our foundation, organized every year in one of the editions of the Foresight training course. We have had more than 1,200 participants across the 16th edition, and for more than 200 hours of lessons and lectures, involving stakeholders, participants from several areas, including patients, regulators, researchers from academia and from industry in all the 16 editions. And discussing different topics with a specific focus on the European regulatory framework and on research and innovation, with the aim to facilitate the adoption of best regulatory practice, speed up research, mainly in the area of pediatrics and rare diseases, and work together with our colleagues and friends. This year, we are planning an introductory session where we will discuss the upcoming changes in the pharmaceutical legislation. Then we will have later today speakers talking about most recent advancement in clinical research. And following that, tomorrow we will have research and development and the needs for funding and investments. And the final session would be on access to medicines and medical devices throughout Europe. As most of you, if not all, know, there is a big revision of the regulatory framework which is happening in recent years with several aims, including strengthening the position of the EU pharma industry, not only in Europe but globally, trying to attract pharmaceutical research and development to providing a more stable legal framework with incentives and creating a favorable environment, and so on. This is being done introducing a new regulation and a new directive which will amend and repeal the existing ones. And specifically, all the regulatory, this will include a revision of the regulatory framework for pediatrics and orphan diseases, but also, more in general, medicines for human use. During the discussion, which already started almost 5 years ago, with several rounds of consultations, workshops, and analysis done by the European Commission, by the stakeholders' involvement with support from also other agency and stakeholders, including the Gianni Benzi Foundation. The European Commission has presented to the Parliament a first proposal almost 2 years ago, which has been the basis for the discussion within the European Parliament and a vote taking place 1.5 years ago, and currently and followed, by the position from the Council of Europe recently this summer in 2025. What is ongoing now is the so-called trilogue, that is the interinstitutional negotiation among the 3 major stakeholders, the European Commission, the EU Parliament, and the Council. Everyone has recognized pros and cons in the proposal and in the amendment that had been proposed, with possible identified shortcomings, for instance, for the pediatric regulation, where some of the requirements of the premises that were part of the original regulation had been moved to a directive, so introducing a different potential different approach, especially when each single member state will have to adopt this directive. But this will be discussed later in the presentation that is going to start. And so I can now give the floor to our first speaker, that is John Joseph Borg, the Director of Post-Licensing at Malta's Medicines Authority. Is a member of the EMA, CHMP, the PDCO, and the CAT, with strong expertise in pharmaceutical regulation, clinical trials, pharmacovigilance, and advanced therapies. John's presentation will be discussed, will be followed by the one from Stefano Marino and Enrico Costa, which I will introduce immediately after John. So I will start and leave the floor to John Joseph Borg. Hope you are here and can hear me. But indeed, I can't see you. So if we can't see John, maybe Stefano, if you can, we could start with your presentation. I know you have been already able to align with the other speaker in this session, so maybe we can even change the order of the presentation. So Stefano Marino is currently a senior consultant at DLA Piper, a legal firm. He was the head of the legal department at EMA in the past 10 years or so, with a really long-lasting experience in the pharmaceutical sector and huge expertise in the EU regulatory law and litigation. So, Stefano, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Indeed, as Chair was saying, we had agreed with John Joseph Borg to share the job. He would have given a general introduction about this massive reform of the European Pharma Law, and then I would have concentrated on the last episodes of the saga, starting with the approval by the Council on the 4th of June 25 of a new text after the one presented by the Commission and the compromise proposal issued by the Parliament 1 year later. Anyway, since John is not here, and if he jumps in, feel free to interrupt me at any time. I will try to give you a quick snapshot of where we are at the moment and what is going on in these very days in Brussels, because the permanent representatives of the member states are meeting now and then, and they are trying to find difficult compromises on several issues. So I'll try to share my screen now. I hope that you can see my screen. Can you see it?
No, not yet, Stefano, but I think is arriving. Yes.
Okay.
Now we can see it.
You can see it. All right. Thank you very much.
You can
all right.
do presentation mode.
Yeah. See if I am able to do that as well. Okay, I hope you can see that. So as I was saying, this has been a long reform, long in the sense that I personally have been the witness of 3 different reforms. One in 1986, leading to the approval of the directive of 87/21 that the oldest of you may recall. And then in 2003, with the approval of Regulation 27/24 and new amendments to the directive 2001/83. I have to say this present reform is by far the most difficult, in my opinion. I was on the other side, on the regulatory side, until last year, after 11 years at the EMA. But even when I was in industry and I led, for example, some parts of the reform on behalf of industry in 2003, I don't recall such a level of difficulties and such a level of complications in finding a compromise around this reform. Why is that? This is because, in practice, the Commission in 2003 tried to bring to the attention of all stakeholders, member states, interested parties, etc., a very ambitious reform, leading to a sort of turmoil in the regulatory background as we know it. Not only by changing the times of regulatory data protection, for example, reducing it from 8 to 6 years as standards, but also introducing some new obligations for companies, for applicants, for example, the one to launch and approve products within two years from the centralized approval. And then also giving a little bit of carrot at the end, like that is the concession of new incentives, for example, in the antibiotic field. I will don't want to jump to the conclusion, but I have to say that the very ambitious reform proposed by the Commission is falling into pieces from my perspective, because the member states perhaps are increasingly skeptical about the possibility by the regulatory network to bear such a complex reform. And maybe there's another ghost in the room in Brussels, which is the fact that meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, the US administration has launched an equally ambitious reform, or at least is trying to approve it. And that will bring tension amongst the various players, and certainly amongst the US and the EU, both trying to make their continent the most attractive at all in the world globally. But so, my aim today is to show you a little bit in 4 slides, only 4, what the Council has decided on the 4th of June. And the first consideration, most important one perhaps, affects the regulatory data protection and marketing exclusivity. Now, you know that we started from a 8+2+1, so-called, in the as-is situation crystallized by the regulation and directives of 2024. The Commission, as I said, has tried to go below that, giving a standard regulatory data protection of 6 years, and then giving incentives according to a very modular approach and according to a number of complex occurrences and conditions upon which companies may have access to additional years of data protection and or marketing exclusivity. I don't need to remind you the difference between RDP and ME, but in essence, with RDP, nobody can refer to your dossier protected by RDP, while with marketing exclusivity, it's a protection that takes place on the market itself. So no one can market the product, even if it has obtained, like generics can do, in the 9th or 10th year, a registration from the European Commission. Now, the Council has said, well, we don't want to change too much. And why is that? Because we are afraid that the competitiveness of the European industry, or at least the industry in general, operating in the European Union might fall. And because we already have to recover a number of gaps in terms of competitiveness versus the United States and versus China. And some very learned colleagues from EMA will speak about clinical trials later on today. Member states don't want to disrupt too much the protection period for the dossier. Hence, they decided that the standard 8 years should be confirmed, not curbed. And then they would give an additional year of data protection, is the one that you see here on this slide in green, for a particular additional studies, for example, on a new therapeutic indication or route of administration, but leading to a significant clinical benefit. Now, beside the 8+1 system now approved by the Council, they believe that the marketing exclusivity instead could be made modular. And what does that mean? They would give the 1 year standard. Then they would give 1 year marketing exclusivity, not RDP, as I said before, for a new significant therapeutic indication approved within the first years of regulatory data protection. So this is an important change because before, even with 9 years, you could prevent other people from referring to your dossier. According to the Council's proposal, this pertains only to the marketing exclusivity. And then they would give 1 more year of marketing exclusivity for unmet medical need. We will come to that concept in a moment. Or, that is completely new versus the proposal by the Commission and the Parliament, only for new active substances, 1 more year if the applicant has conducted comparative clinical trials. The clinical trials on efficacy have been conducted in more than 1 EU member states. These are the multi-country clinical trials that Mario Draghi, in his Draghi report on EU competitiveness, hoped that the European Union could produce in the next years. And so the 3 conditions are cumulative, that the marketing authorization application is submitted in Europe first or no later than 90 days from its submission outside the European Union. You can see here a sort of echo of what comes from the other side of the Atlantic, this competition among the two markets and the attempt to give rewards to those who apply first in Europe, or at least no later than 90 days from the submission having been made, for example, in Japan or in America or elsewhere. Generics can still file after 6 years from the RDP start. So this is what the Council proposal on the 4th of June has decided. Now, from my information, but maybe John Borg will be much more precise than I can be because he's a first-hand witness of the dialogues and the trilogues. From my information, this proposal could fly, although there are some member states who could still who would like to go down a little bit with the regulatory data protection standard, simply for economic reasons, I must suppose. So trying to open the doors more to generics. But anyway, this is one of the areas on which I think the Council has done a good job, and it should be praised for this attempt to find a good compromise. If I then look at what we call the repurposed products, that is, the products approved for one or more therapeutic indications, long ago, many years ago, but now clinically tested and approved for a new therapeutic indication, the Council has gone from the previous proposals by the Commission and the Parliament a little bit down, but it recognizes 4 years for these repurposed products. This is a very good area, very nice area for academia, for example, or for medium enterprises who don't have the potential, don't have the strength to engage in a complex research and development efforts of new molecules from scratch. Repurposing is a nice activity. And I have to say, based on my personal experience in the United States, it's very helpful for patients. And in fact, they love it in the States. And then when it comes to orphan products, the Council has confirmed the 10-year standard for the orphans. The Commission and the Parliament had tried to go down a little bit, but orphan products is confirmed to be one of the most strategic and important for patients in Europe. Therefore, the Council didn't want to betray the expectations of those patients. And then 5 years of RDP for literature for bibliographic application based on well-established use. Then the marketing authorization holder can still get 1 year more marketing exclusivity if a new indication for a different orphan condition is granted within the first 8 years of market exclusivity, up to 2 indications. What does it mean? It means that to get this additional 2 years, you really have to be very brave and clever in that you have to convince the CHMP that you really have a different orphan condition. There have been cases litigated at the EU Court of Justice where the court recognized additional years of marketing exclusivity even for the same condition, but for example, for a new, very innovative route of administration. I'm referring to the Shire case, for example. This is going to come to an end because the Commission and the Council and the Parliament want to bring this concept of global orphan marketing exclusivity. So the parallel of what we have with the GMA concept for the normal marketing exclusivity for general products. But if you get a new indication for a different orphan condition, then you will get 1 more year, up to 2 more indications, hence 12 years maximum. And importantly, the Council has trumped, at least so far, if surprises of the last minute don't arrive. The concept of high unmet medical need, HUMN, that had been launched by the Commission in an effort to give an additional marketing exclusivity period to developers of orphan products. I have to say this concept, and as proposed by the Commission, was already very vague for those who have to implement it. First of all, the EMA, but then also for companies, because it's very difficult to understand when you have a high unmet medical need, and you can risk decisions to deny the HUMN, hence disappointing companies. So at the end of the day, also in order not to create too many complications, the Council has trumped the concept. I hear from colleagues in Brussels that there may have been some reflection even on this point recently, but in general, personally, I'm one of the few who think that the HUMN is practically a needless complication. So to me, this is welcome. We said that if you use the concept of unmet medical need that currently is used for very specific purposes, first of all, in the Conditional Marketing Authorization Regulation, the 507/2006, is relevant to approve a conditional marketing authorization. Then it's also relevant for the accelerated assessment, which brings down the period from 210 to 180 days for the assessment by CHMP, and in the reform it will be 150 days if it is confirmed. And then also to have access to the priority medicines, we call it business class scientific advice, the prime scientific advice, if you have to demonstrate that you have an unmet medical need. And for orphan products, the UMN concept is sort of given for granted, is sort of a precondition for that, because there exists no alternative for orphan patients. Now, what did the Council do on 4th of June? The Council completely cancelled the definition of unmet medical need that very carefully the Commission had carved in order to introduce new parameters, new criteria to recognize the UMN. But this criteria was very much quantitative. For example, based on the residual morbidity or mortality after administration of the product, which is something that is very difficult, again, both for regulators and for companies to demonstrate to a certain level of clarity and certainty. Therefore, the Council had decided that, no, we have to get rid of those quantitative concepts, and they have decided that again, there must be a disease which is life-threatening or severely debilitating the patients, but then at least one, not all of the three conditions are met. First, there must be no medicinal product authorized for that disease in the Union. Second, the use of that product for such a disease results in a clinically relevant improvement in efficacy. So just 1 second on that sentence. There are no adjectives here. It doesn't say significant clinical relevant improvement or major clinical relevant improvement, just a clinically relevant improvement in efficacy, or in safety with a least comparable efficacy in comparison with existing medicinal products or other method of diagnosis, prevention, or treatment. So this is a very good opening by the Council, which lets us hope for a little bit more liberal approach by the EMA, the CHMP, and the European Commission to the recognition of unmet medical need. And it's important that the three conditions are not cumulative. The EMA shall adopt scientific guidelines to support the application of these articles in consultation with the authorities and other bodies referred to in one of the article, which is in practice stakeholders, member states, and associations of patients and doctors' representatives. So to me, it seems that the Council has made it easier to claim the marketing exclusivity linked to the UMN, as the two conditions are not cumulative. No quantitative criteria are mentioned anymore, and the efficacy and safety come again to be the real compass of the regulatory authorities. And the vague concept of high unmet medical need has been rejected for orphan products. So to me, it seems that this current practical interpretation of UMN corresponds quite a lot to the daily practice as CHMP and COMP as well at the European Medicines Agency. So for me, again, chapeau to the Council if this proposal will be endorsed during the trilogue discussion. And this is my last slide. I would like simply to give a snapshot, because the time would not be enough otherwise, to tell you that in Europe many things are happening at the moment. In addition to the pharma law reform, the new health technology assessment HTA regulation is already in force since the beginning of this year for certain products, and it will become progressively enforceable for other category of products between 2028 and 2030. The Artificial Intelligence Act and the European Health Data Space are also in force as from this year. Some of their provisions are very important for all developers of products and will sort of create an interplay with the European Pharma Law reform. And currently, and I guess before the end of the year, we will assist to two new pieces of legislation being launched by the Commission on the playing field, which is the Biotech Act and the Critical Medicines Act, both without an impact assessment, because Commissioner Varela is insisting very much to have at least the first draft put on the table before the end of the year. And the Biotech Act has been recently split by the Commission in two parts, and the second part will see the light in 2026 and will include some concepts and some other parts that are not strictly related only to the pharmaceutical sector, but for example, also to the food sector. Now, what I see here as a lawyer is an increased, enhanced role of EMA, but also patients, doctor representatives, and national authorities. It is true that patients and doctor representatives are not seen very favorably by the member states, and in fact, Council has been trying to not to grant them the voting rights at the level of the CHMP, for example, for the approval of a new drugs. But on the other hand, the Parliament is pushing for a compromise, and already the number of representatives since the current situation has been doubled. So it reached four for each association of each category of individuals. I see an enhanced role of EMA because EMA will have to issue important scientific guidelines, what I call the tertiary legislation, after the treaty, after the secondary legislation, regulation, and directive, that are then implementing regulation or delegated acts by the Commission, and importantly, scientific guidelines by the EMA. EMA will play a significant role by issuing their interpretation on a number of subjects, for example, unmet medical need, but also the antibiotics of primary importance, of pivotal importance for the future. And one may predict that not everybody will be happy with what the EMA will say, and therefore I can predict that there will be some additional, effervescence or turmoil around their decisions. There will be an impact on the smooth functioning of EMA, because you know that one of the objectives of the Commission was to streamline the regulatory approval process bringing it from 210 to 180. Member states are very concerned by that streamlining, and they would like to maintain the 210. Let's see what happens during the trial of discussion. Certainly, the commission, the scientific bodies at DMA are extremely busy. It will be complicated to work in 180 days unless there will be a massive use of artificial intelligence or, for example, new methodology for registering products like modeling, simulation, extrapolation, and so on. In parallel, there will be certainly an impact coming from other legislative acts. I mentioned already the HTA regulation and the Commission implementing acts. And all of these additional legislative pieces will condition potentially both the governance at DMA and the member states, but also at the level of the applicants. So I can imagine that after the reform, even internally, your companies may decide to change a little bit to face the new challenges better. I also can see a risk of clashes at central and national level. The one I always quote is this possible divergence versus health technology assessment bodies and the payors at national level when reimbursing a product. Why is that? Because the competence, the exclusive competence on pricing or reimbursement is confirmed. And even if there will be a joint clinical assessment, for example, under the new HTA regulation, and the member states will be voting by consensus on the additional added value of one product, then it might well be that a national member state, one of the member states, may refuse to recognize that. So this is one of the aspects that doesn't fit very well with the concept of harmonization and further evolution towards a one and only market, and also a fast access of newly approved products to all the territories. And I can see, again, with my clothes as lawyer, a new and enhanced role by the Court of Justice, General Court in particular, in Luxembourg. The General Court has already shown a certain trend in the last 3 years in accepting and actually claiming the role of interpreter of the legislation in a way that often, in my view, trespassed the scope of judicial review. If I quote one of the examples, for example, Tec Fidera, some of you may know about that case. Well, the Tec Fidera position, the position of the General Court on Tec Fidera was extremely aggressive. Then the Court of Justice canceled that judgment. But this is a sort of sign that the judges will intervene, especially in the first years of the application of the new legislation. They will have to fill some gaps or resolve some delicate uncertainties. And I can believe that there will be a new judicial co-legislator, exactly as we saw in some member states, and the country where I'm from, where Fondazione Benzi is from, is one of those who experienced this birth of a new legislator. I think I should stop here, and thank you very much. I will be available for any questions, both after my presentation and after the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefano. This has been a very interesting and nice introduction to the themes for today and tomorrow. You provide a very clear picture of the situation and the risks that we will have to face in the near future. I have invited everyone to include their questions online in the chat so that at the end of the session we can address them in order. And I will now invite John Borg to present. Good afternoon, John. Thank you for joining. Gianni is the Director of Post-Licensing at Malta's Medicines Authority and a member of the EMA's CHMP, PDCO, and CAP. We have 10 to 15 minutes maximum for you, John. Okay. And questions will follow at the end after the third and last presentation of this session. Thank you.
Thanks. So you can see the presentation, yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so I'll skip over this. Yeah, so I've been asked to talk a little bit about this from our perspective, being a member state position. Yes, so what's on the table officially? So officially, and I hope that this is not going to be a repetition from what Stefano actually presented. We have the new regulation and the new directive, and the aims, essentially on a big picture perspective, are to have specific rules for the most innovative medicines, such as orphan antimicrobials, shortages, all right, rules on shortages and security, as well as changes to the EMA governance, as well as rules on placing on the market of all medicines and authorization and labeling requirements with strong incentives for access. The ambition is to overcome these challenges with respect to access. We think and we believe that there's no single market because of the fragmentation that we have, especially on small markets. The regulatory framework also has to be quite competitive to actually facilitate and stimulate, one, the registration of high-quality medicines in Europe, but also to stimulate the development of successful candidates and medicines as well. With respect to shortages and supply of security, there are rules being proposed over there. The legislation takes provision of the environmental provisions with respect to the marketing authorization applications, as well as combating AMR. In terms of unmet medical needs, many serious diseases still lack appropriate treatment, and current investments in pharmaceutical R&D do not always prioritize unmet medical needs, particularly if scientific challenges or limited commercial interest is there. Therefore, the legislation, supposedly the new legislation, is there to provide specific incentives to steer pharmaceutical R&D towards this unmet medical need, with regulatory protection incentives and increased regulatory support for developers, like, for example, having the prime schemes, data protection, market exclusivity, etc. In terms of the legislation, as already Stefano explained to us, the Commission put the following. So officially, this is what is at the table. It doesn't matter what the Council, it matters what the Council's position is and what the Parliament's position is. We all know that they all finished their deliberations, but what's really on the table at the moment is this. And now we see how the deliberations are going to go with the triage and the discussions over there and the compromises to actually be negotiated. In terms of the unmet medical need, we have the indication criterion, as well as comparison to the need for comparison to authorized medicines, and the effect on the criterion, like the use of the medicine results in meaningful reduction in disease, morbidity, mortality for relevant patient population. Then the Commission as well in their proposal proposed the concept of the high unmet medical needs for orphans. The therapeutic indication must relate to a life-threatening or chronically debilitating condition. And then with respect to comparisons to authorized medicine, there should be the criteria either or. No medicines is authorized and the medicine is authorized in the EU, but it will bring exceptional therapeutic advances, which is sort of more than significant benefit. But as Stefano explained at the Council, we found this a little bit scratching our heads of how to think about and do this, essentially. So the unmet medical need aims to identify products that bring an added therapeutic value to patients suffering from serious diseases that are not yet sufficiently addressed by existing treatments. Reducing patients' mortality and morbidity. The term morbidity is intended in the broad sense, covering health outcomes other than mortality, from a highly unmet medical need for orphans. While all orphans are considered to address an unmet medical need, the subcategory of HUMN orphans aims to further promote development of orphan medicines for underserved rare disease area and to reward exceptional therapeutic advancement. Exceptional therapeutic advancement aims to identify transformative treatments that has major impact on efficacy or major impact on the course of disease, like a shift from purely symptomatic to disease-modifying treatment, from disease-modifying treatment. In terms of implementation, as Stefano told us, the Commission proposal, and nobody's denying this, neither with respect to the Council discussions, that implementation shall be via the EMA scientific guidelines as well as delegated acts to the Commission. The advantages of EMA guidelines would be that they should try to ensure that all relevant scientific and technical considerations are taken into account and can evolve with time, notwithstanding that essentially guidelines are already being developed by the EMA, and many are past their revision date. Some approach, as in the current legislation, which sets the general principles and criteria and leaves technical details and guidance as well. And when developing guidelines on this area, the EMA will seek input from the HTA bodies, pricing and reimbursements, and other relevant groups to sort of legitimize the whole process per se. With respect to incentives, on the table, we have 12 months market exclusivity and 6 months regulatory data protection, and the proposal for procedural simplification. There are actually quite a number of measures over there, like, for example, the reduction of assessment and approval time from 207 days to 226, optimizing the EMEA structure according to the Commission proposal and simplifying regulatory procedures, better use of data and digitalization, and possibility for regulators to reject immature applications to limit clock stops that delay the decision. This, I have to say that many regulatory authorities are quite keen on this aspect, the last bullet point. With respect to pre-authorization support, strengthening the early regulatory support by EMA is essentially formalizing the prime and what has been happening at EMA for ages. Now, with parallel scientific advice and advice involving consultations of other bodies, these are there, and provisions, if at all, are being strengthened with respect to the discussions of the Council. Support for SMEs and non-profit entities are still there, with regulatory procedure and administrative support for the reduction and deferral of waivers of fees, and the possibility to review data in phases as they become available for promising medicines. With respect to what's really new, we have regulatory sandboxes to test new and innovative therapies. Don't ask me anything about this because it's not my area to understand about regulatory sandboxes, especially in the area of biological medicines. Adaptive frameworks with specific regulatory requirements tailored to the characteristics of certain novel medicines. Improved clarity on the interplay between EU legislative frameworks for medicines and other health technologies, as Stefano explained already, with provisions to have joint scientific advices as well as interactions with these bodies, and introduction of possibly of a scientific recommendation on regulatory status of a product under development. With respect to streamlining EU opinions, there's provisions being proposed by the Commission on cooperation between EMA and union agency or scientific committee where substantive divergence over scientific or technical issues is identified, to have cooperation on scientific assessments and methodologies with other union agencies to enable coherence between scientific opinions and to avoid duplications of tests, to exchange data and information on relevant substances, in particular for ERA, non-clinical studies, and minimum residual levels with the Commission, the Member States and Union agencies. With respect to governance, the proposed changes to EMA being proposed are a reduction in number of committees. We know about that, with 2 remaining committees still remaining, With respect to the council, yes, they kept these two committees. With respect to the comp and other committees which are going to have been downgraded by the Commission, the Council proposed that dedicated expert groups are set up not to essentially lose that expertise of those committees which have been going on for quite a number of years. According to the Commission, they extended the expertise in CHMP and PRAC core membership by complementing them with the voice of patients and healthcare professionals in CHMP and PRAC. Essentially, this is what is being proposed with on the table by the Commission, which is the current composition. As you can see, 1 member per member state and 1 alternate per member state, and then up to 5 members based on the specific competence, and then 4 members for healthcare professionals and 1 alternate, and 4 members and 4 alternates by patients. That's what's on the table currently. Yeah, so this is what the proposed committee structure is going to be, with the PRAC still there, giving exactly operating as it currently is today, with all the positions as is. Nothing has changed, with the advice being forwarded to CHMP. Of course, you understand that since CHMP is a committee, and of course it's made up with these amount of people, and there shall be all these procedures passing through it, I doubt that the committee will specifically spend a lot of time actually FaceTime discussing PIPs and comp procedures. Because it's busy doing the benefit risk assessment of all the variations, referrals, line extensions, etc. Yeah, and that is why the council recommended that some other structures are actually put in place. Yes, and that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. A clear presentation. As said, we are postponing all possible questions to the end, close to the end of today. So I would like to invite Enrico Costa, if Enrico is with us. Yes. Good afternoon, Enrico. Enrico is the head of International Affairs at the Italian Medicines Agency, AIFA, and Italian representative at the COMP. So, Enrico, the floor is yours. You can share your screen and go on with your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm trying to share my screen. I don't know what you see.
Currently, only your face.
Unfortunately. So how can I share?
It is the button in the upper right front.
Yeah, I see it, but
Okay.
Yep. Now it's working.
Not yet.
I don't know if Francesca can present.
If you want, we can share your presentation, and you will only be able to tell us when to move to the following slide. Okay, so we can do that internally with Francesca or Maria Luisa going to share their screen.
Okay. Thank you, much appreciated. Sorry for inconvenience.
I know it happens. Don't worry.
Yeah. I see something. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Can you see?
Good.
So,
thank you. So first of all, thank you to the organizer, and thank you also to Stefano and John for putting forward this comprehensive presentation. This is why I figure out to complement the lot that has been said so far. So my presentation just want to give you the flavor of how can pharma regulation can promote innovation, because usually pharma regulation can just create, you know, the environment, the so-called ecosystem, to promote it and boost innovation, and not per se create innovation. First of all, next slide. Yes, housekeeping, I can skip it. I don't have any conflict of interest to declare. So just to recall what the main objectives, the main goals of the regulation that follow this package follows the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, a very challenging, very high level goals to promote innovation, in particular in areas of unmet medical needs, as we discussed for a while, reducing regulatory burden, and also a new concept of being part of this, of the benefit risk evaluation, the environmental impact of medicines. Then to ensure that this innovation is accessible to everyone. Okay, so, and also tackle the issue of shortages, and last, to create a balance in a competitive system. So in keeping medicine affordable, but at the same time to create a way to reward innovation. I would say some of them could be in contrast, because it's quite challenging to promote innovation and access, although innovation outside the scope of pharmaceuticals usually is also considered when it's accessible to everyone. The real innovation in transport is when new transport with less environmental impact can allow everyone to move around, for example. This usually doesn't work for pharmaceutical. Next. So we have to put this proposal, this pharma package, into a more global, wider scenario that has been evolving for a while. Although this pharma package, as said, is amending previous directive and regulation, and but it also now will play along with other regulation that has been recently developed, such as the regulation HTA and the new two package that are the Critical Medicine Act that is under discussion, and the Biotech Act that will be going to be released in a short. But in the below part of the slides, that is in the interplay with this regulation, there are also a new, more flexible, I would say, ecosystem in the regulatory space, whereby regulators, the DMA, has new tools to approve medicines with more flexible evidence, and with also tools to promote and to foster the review and approval than in the past. So this is why, next slide, this is why, because the overall scenario has changed over the past 50 years. Is not just regulation, but regulation talk with a broader context in which for example, the genetic code was cracked down. We have new research platform, new pathophysiological pathways and target has been discovered or uncovered. And so in this evolving background of knowledge, we need to update the way we review and approve medicine. Next slide. And this is just an example in one of severe diseases affecting, in particular, our area in medicine, ovarian area, thalassemia, in which I will just want to highlight the last histogram on the right, where the green one is the orphan designation targeting the genetic defect of the disease. And then the nuances of colors are the downstream consequences of the disease. So R&D models shift in all areas from targeting the consequences of the disease to the causes, the primary causes, so the upstream events. So that's quite remarkable. Next slide. And is the scenario we have been dealing with today. And using the market exclusivity, that's what's called in the United States. We have market exclusivity only for orphan drugs. We have regulatory protection is data protection, as Stefano explained, and market protection. Market exclusivity was used for the past 40 years in the United States to steer drug development towards areas of unmet medical needs. Of course, the two systems are quite different for legal and regulatory backgrounds, and also in the culture of the way the two agencies, FDA and EMA, deal with the benefit risk of medicines. But as soon as the Orphan Drugs Act was enacted, we all observed a shift in the core business of big corporations, including rare diseases, because became remunerative. Next slide. So what's going on here? Europe has one of the most, of the longest, I would say, regulatory protection period. We have 2 + 8 years of data protection. As Stefano said, is the period in which no one can access to the data that a company uses to develop and market the medicines, plus 2 years in which you can access this data but not enter the market, although you can gain a market authorization. In other parts of the world, as you see, this period are shorter, but run in a different way. For example, in the United States, they do not apply the boiler exemption. So we should also be able to read this data hand in hand with patents, because in the impact assessment of the Commission, they relied on the report highlighting how 70% roughly of medicines expiring regulatory protection were still covered by a patent of a complementary certificate of protection. So that means that it's an aimless discussion reducing data protection if we do not consider also patents, because next slide, because it risks to not produce the results we pursue in this discussion. The main point probably is how we can, but is out of the scope of regulation, tackle with the so-called patent thickening. So the secondary patents and how these protect probably what is not a real innovation. Anyway, the point is, how can we make this environment, this ecosystem, European ecosystem, more attractive for pharmaceutical industry to land innovation safely in our space? Some of us think that reducing data protection could be interpreted as a message that would weaken this protection, scaring pharmaceutical industry to invest in Europe. And we already said this is just an example of high price medicines for cystic fibrosis. That's a remarkable innovation, okay? And we observe, just to read the first histogram, how in Europe these products were approved on average 267 days after the FDA application, the FDA approval. So that's the delay. This histogram had to be read as a delay after the FDA approval. And 39% of this delay pertain to the delay that companies has to submit it to the EMA, and 61% is the more time employed by the EMA in reviewing the dossier in comparison with the FDA. So we have two domains to tackle. First is to make something that foster industry to come to Europe first, and second, to be probably a little bit quicker in reviewing and approval medicines. Next slide, please. So, as extensively discussed by Stefano and John, we shifted from a one-size-fits-all model to a targeted approach. Next slide. That means that the data protection on the left is the current system, actually, and then the proposal of the Commission was to stratify this to modulate this period at the satisfying of different characteristic comparative trials and medical need and market launch. That's quite critical, very from intellectual perspective, very challenging, but probably critical from a practical standpoint, because comparative trials for some diseases are not practical, and medical need is not clear, we will see it, and market launch is quite difficult and is now probably out of the scope of the discussion. Next slide. The same discussion was mirrored in the space of orphan drugs, where in this modulation was introduced the concept of high unmet medical need, extensively discussed as well. But in this way, I can say that Italy was not in favor of this concept of a high unmet medical need, because it's not clear in comparison with unmet medical need, and we don't want a super orphan drugs where this label is given only on the base of the concept of unmet medical need, because it must be coupled, and I show you at the end of the presentation, with the added therapeutic benefit. Otherwise, is something that come to our market, and in public finance health system, we have to reimburse it. It's very difficult to negotiate a price when you have such label of high unmet medical need. So you have a super drugs that probably is just super drugs for what they target, but not in the way it targets the disease. Next slide. So why is very complex and challenging, the discussion? Because we don't understand what unmet medical need is. And this is a long debated in the regulatory space, and is not clear from the regulatory from the European Commission proposal what exactly unmet medical need is. And in this case, this was one interesting publication of colleagues from Utrecht, my colleagues from Utrecht, say that at the end of the day, what we should consider is not in the different nuances of unmet medical need. We have to consider the societal perspective and not the individual one when we have to define unmet medical need in regulatory space. Next slide. So another aspect, because I was asked to describe to what the regulation does to boost innovation, is focus on the development of new antimicrobials to contrast the so-called antimicrobial resistance. And the proposal put on the table this TEV, transferable data exclusivity voucher, which provide two additional months of data protection for an authorized product. So a company developing an antimicrobial can sell this voucher to transfer to another company, which can take this voucher of additional 12 months on his own product. This is quite challenging. Next slide, because it was debated, a hot debated topic, because it is considered a flow incentives, and also this voucher can hamper the sustainability of publicly health care services when you transfer this voucher to blockbuster. You think, for example, anti-cancer medicines, prolonging for another year the data protection and the entry of generics or biosimilar. I'm concluding with the next few slides, saying that recently the Lancet discuss how, so at the end of the day, when the Orphan Drug Act was enacted in the United States, for the first 10 years, nothing happened. So it's not just a matter of regulatory protection or market exclusivity. Nothing happened. And what really changed was in the 90s and the beginning of the century, when the system was able to recognize the value of these drugs, and company can sell orphan drugs at the price, and we know. So, but the point is that high price doesn't mean innovation. Next slide. That's for sure. That's absolutely true. Investing more money in research prices does not necessarily mean that we then have innovation. But it's also true the opposite, that with less investment, with low prices, we probably have less innovation, of course, with few exceptions. Next slide. So what drive innovation? What is innovation? Innovation probably is something that is a stepwise. Of course, we have different nuances and definition of innovation. We have a pharmacological innovation, we have pharmaceutical innovation, and we have clinical innovation. And what system usually take into account is the clinical innovation, is what a new therapeutic avenues bring to patients to change their life expectancies and quality of life. And usually, next slide, innovation is in Italy, we have this algorithm to renew innovation, to grant this state of innovative medicines in the interplay with these three domains, that is the therapeutic need, so the unmet medical need when it's maximum and absent. We have different shades. And then is coupled with the added therapeutic benefit, the added therapeutic advantage of what really these drugs bring to patients. And then we complement it with the quality of evidence. So, because the interplay of these three dimensions, you see when the green prevail, and new medicines can receive this innovative status, that open the door to other incentives at national level. So, to conclude, next slide. What can regulation improve innovation? Yes, can regulation, innovation, and access are, of course, work together, goes hand in hand, but regulation alone, in our experience, is not sufficient to steer to improve innovation. There are other parameters around in the ecosystem that should take into account. The regulation serves as a promoter to foster the process and not to slow down all these scientific, legal, and blah blah backgrounds. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico. Thanks a lot for your presentation. So, discussing the possible changes and what is going to happen. So, as there are no questions from the audience, I would like to make only one question that could be the same for each of you. And is, do you think that it is feasible to reach a final agreement on the new pharmaceutical framework by the end of this year, as someone is saying? And also considering that the world we are currently living in is totally different if compared to the one where the proposals for the new regulation were introduced by the European Commission, I would say only a couple of years ago, but in a totally different framework. The approach that our partners are adopting, I'm thinking of the US, but not only that, may imply the need to revise and reconsider all the options. Let's see what will happen. So what do you think? Which could be a feasible time frame for the changes? And
perhaps John can start, and then I will give you my honest opinion.
Well, frankly, I don't think that there's going to be agreement till the end of the year. I mean, by the end of the year. So I haven't seen anything coming our way that there's going to be a final deliberation.
It is
and
too
discussing
close.
this. They're still discussing, absolutely. Enrico, any news you know about?
Well, of course, I don't think it's an open secret that the council would like to conclude operation by the end of the year, because then we have also the Critical Medicine Act that is on its way, and then we would like to concentrate on the Biotech Act that is going to be released at the end of the year. So could be, but there are still some important issues that are open, and yeah, probably, I don't know. There is a Coreper in the middle of September, in the middle of December. Probably is the last chance to have the green light. You know, member states are stick to their compromise because they consider that was the real compromise we can reach. The Parliament has just sent back few comments regarding political aspects. Of course, where the Parliament amended the Commission proposal, or whether they are most keen on, are voucher for antimicrobials, data protection, and patients representative in the regulatory process, roughly speaking, so in general terms. So probably yes, probably no. Probably John is right. We need 1 or 2 months more.
I also would agree with that view, but the only hope I have is that very pragmatically, the Danish presidency before the end of the year will make a choice, because it's very difficult to agree on everything, on the governance, on working parties. Duccio is an expert in pediatrics and orphans, and you know how much it is important to have scientific experts in pediatrics and in orphan drugs at the level of the CHMP. So maybe if I were the Danish president, to be honest, I would like to try to find an agreement on the main points that are more important to industry, like the regulatory data protection, for example, and marketing exclusivity. And I would concede some more room to the member states, in particular small member states, concerning the governance aspects. I would totally agree, for example, with the position taken by Malta on the broad geographic representation in the working parties, because otherwise the working parties are only another group for the big member states to raise their voice. So if the Danish presidency were a little bit pragmatic in times of realpolitik, of course, then I would probably distinguish the governance aspects from the main themes that are more important to industry. And this is because with this cold winds blowing from Washington, from the United States, the difficulty for industries and regulatory authorities here may be immense. I was reflecting, Enrico, on one thing very important you said concerning price and innovation. Of course, not always giving high price gives innovation. But look what's going on just in these days in London. London is considering raising the prices that the NHS reimburses, because they don't want to become less attractive, and because they want to match the most favored nation clause or attitude or claims or requests made by Senator Kennedy and his administration. Wow. So you see, it's a complicated puzzle. And I conclude and I give the floor to John immediately. If Cyprus takes the presidency with no in January with no agreement made, I think this reform will take additional 18 months to see the light. Over.
Yeah, I mean, the way we see it is when you tease out, really tease out with the current framework and what we're getting, what is actually new and needed. The marketing authorizations we still do. The assessments are still there. The voice of the patients are in the comp and in the PDCO. Now they're going to disappear, where they can actually make a real impact and discussion. What are they going to discuss? Things of pre-authorization, which is essentially the efficacy and safety data of a disease, where they're representing, I don't know, eye experts, and then they're going to vote on Duchenne. It's very complicated to a sense. I mean, what's really on the table? I mean, what are we getting? Increased pathways for industry, which they want. They still have prime, they still have adaptive licenses, they still have scientific advice, they still have the market exclusivity, they still have that. Actually, we would like to have a new legislation because of the pathways to get essentially the rewards and incentives by placing the products onto the market. Perhaps we should have done regulatory optimization. With the current framework, we've invented a lot of things which we currently do, and now we're putting legislation in prime, for example. But that was a good regulatory optimization of the current system and framework. Nobody said that it's illegal, actually. So to a certain extent, I ask, what are we really getting if at all the current framework remains. Because the only things that I see which are really, really positive, at least for us, are the lodging of applications which are immature, that we can actually have a look at them and essentially block them because they jam our resources. I mean, in terms of reduced timelines, do you know that we can do an assessment report in 60 days? If we want to, we can, regulatory-wise. But I don't know why we write 3,000 pages for an assessment report, where in 2010 we were writing 150. It was perfectly acceptable. Now we have to stay. It takes time to write reports which can withstand regulatory scrutiny at the European Courts of Justice. So to a certain extent, the way that I see it, now maybe I am a bit controversial, all right, from my approach, but when I see it point blank, helicopter level, che guadagniamo?
No, but the problem is what industry can